Hello and welcome to a video about video games. More specifically, it's about the relationship between the player and the character they're playing as. Now, as a gamer, I mainly enjoy games that are driven by their story, and I especially like it when games elicit an emotional response from the player. Some of my favourite games include Mafia, Deus Ex, Max Payne, Second Sight, The Longest Journey, and The Last of Us. All of these games have something in common, and that is that I related to and empathized with the protagonists in all of these games. In this video, we're going to look at some of the techniques developers use to relate the player to their player character, and then see how player agency relates to that concept. Before we start, it's worth defining player agency. Theorist Janet Murray finds agency as the satisfying power to take meaningful action and see the results to our decisions and choices. So basically, it's the freedom to make choices and have the game react to those choices. Without further ado, let's look at some techniques. Firstly, you have games which present linear film-like narratives. The characterization is mostly presented through cutscenes, and the player simply plays out the protagonist's actions through gameplay. As the player has little to no control in characterizing who they're playing as, it's up to the developer to create a relatable character. This results in varied responses to the characters presented. Some people may like the character and some won't. Games that do this include Metal Gear Solid, Final Fantasy, Prince of Persia, Resident Evil, Halo, Max Payne, and many, many more. A good example of this is Mafia: The City of Lost Heaven. The protagonist of Mafia is a guy named Tommy Angelo. Throughout the course of the story, Angelo is forced to make multiple tough decisions which you as a player have no control over. You have no agency in characterizing Angelo. Despite this, every decision Tommy Angelo makes is exactly the decision I would have made myself if I was in his situation. Angelo's character happens to align with my own character as a player. This in turn strengthens the sense of connection I experienced with him, and because of this my emotional investment and response to the game was heightened. This may not be the experience others had with Mafia, however, as others could dislike the decisions Angelo made. This in turn could jeopardize a player's entire involvement with the story in the game. Now, this is ultimately a problem in most linear film-like story-driven games, particularly those that are character-driven. Developers seem to be aware of this and have devised some clever ways of getting past the potential issue. The most obvious way of doing this is by allowing for the player to have agency within characterizing their avatars by allowing the player to make decisions for themselves. Deus Ex is one of the most beloved games ever made due vastly to how much freedom it gives the player to express themselves, among other things. The protagonist of Deus Ex, JC Denton, could be a super stealthy, smooth-talking pacifist, a crazy psychopath, or anywhere in between. It's up to the player. Your character in real life can be expressed through JC Denton seamlessly, as it allows for a high level of player agency. Allowing for the player to make so many decisions like in Deus Ex is mostly a very effective method of storytelling in a video game, however it isn't easy to create a game like this. Deus Ex is created in such a way that every possible thing that the player could do must be accounted for in the game, as it has a branching storyline with branching gameplay styles. For developers, it's often a very resource-heavy project creating such a game, and it's hard to make it coherent. Similar games that use this branching style include The Walking Dead, Mass Effect, The Elder Scrolls, and Alpha Protocol. An alternative to the branching storyline style is having a non-linear sandbox-style game. The most recent trend of survival games often fit into this category, such as Minecraft, DayZ, Rust, and Project Zomboid. These games are so open-ended that they allow for true non-linear storytelling by the player, so much so that players don't consider their player character as separate from themselves. In these games, you aren't playing as a character, you are the character. Developers have achieved this by allowing the player to make virtually every decision in the game and allowing dynamic responses to those decisions. The narratives in these games are constructed by the player instead of the developer, as the developer simply creates a premise and the framework to allow for dynamic storytelling. So as you can see, the more player agency allowed for the player directly correlates with how much the player relates to the player character. Obviously, there are other elements that are used to establish this relationship, such as visual character customization, the use of perspectives, NPC interactions, and tone. Yet the ability to shape your character through freedom in mechanics and narrative seems to be the most important element, as it allows for the player to implement their own character within the avatar they're playing as, which is vital in establishing an emotional investment from the player. Thanks for watching.